Thank you very much, everyone. Welcome to this third day. I hope that still you have energy to go through one more day of hydrogen. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here and to have these incredible panelists here with me. So I think that after 3 days, it has become quite clear that green hydrogen will be critical for the decarbonization of the European energy mix and also to ensure our energy independence, right? So if we look at the long term, let me look at 2050. Great. No, okay. I mean, we have great targets. We have heard about it over those days. We could consume more than 300 million tons of green hydrogen in 2050, both using it as an energy carrier, also using it as a feedstock. But let's look at it more short term or mid term, if you want. 2030. 2030 is tomorrow. I'm not talking about in 10 years, as we used to say, 15 years. 2030 is in 6 years, less than 6 years. We're already in February. Okay, so if you look at the European regulation, in 2030, we should be consuming 42.5% of our consumption. It should be green already, and also you have targets in the transport segment. So I think the conclusion is clear. We need to scale this up. Up to now, we have been proving that this could work. Now we need to take it to the next level. So I think the objective of today's panel is to be able to deep dive on what is required to be able to achieve this scale up and to focus on 3 key things, right? We need to look at partnerships, we need to look at regulation, and we need to look at technology. And I think that, okay, looking at the people we have here, we are pretty well equipped to have this discussion. Okay, so let me introduce the panelists. So, well, we have with us 5 panelists. Let me start with Jorge Paradela, who is the regional minister for industry, energy, and mining. Prior to that, Jorge used to be also the European Director of Corporate Affairs for Heineken, and he has several other positions in the company. So I think that, well, a lot of background on these key topics. Additionally, you can also remember him from being the business general manager on the executive committee of Sevilla Football Club. Well, I think that that's also quite important considering the regional importance of the sport here. So thank you very much, Jorge, for being with us. Monica Swanson, so program manager of the hydrogen corridors at the Port of Rotterdam. So she's a member of the international team at the port. And Monica has been at the forefront of building the Port of Rotterdam Global Hydrogen Import Program over the last years. So thank you very much, Monica, for being with us. Ignacio Álvarez-Ossorio, the managing director for the Port of Huelva. Well, Ignacio is an engineer and has been working at the port since 1993. Well, he currently has the position of director of the Port Authority of Huelva. For hydrogen at EDP Renewables. So Anna leads EDP Renewables hydrogen business globally. And before that, Anna used to be the head of energy planning at EDP. And finally, so thank you very much, Anna, for being with us. Manuel Kuehn, so the vice president for sustainable energy systems at Siemens Energy. Well, Manuel is an engineer also, and since February 2022 has been responsible for the global sales, bid management, and solutions development for power to X, power to liquids, hybrid sustainable energy systems at global energy technology providers, Siemens. So, well, thank you very much to all of you for being here. I would like to start the discussion with, I mentioned 3 things. I think regulation was the first one. So let's discuss about regulation. And I would like to get your views on carrot and stick. So I think that we have seen the RED III coming in place. Well, in a way, some people mention that this is the stick. So we are asking people to consume hydrogen. But we also have seen European Hydrogen Bank. We are seeing the, PERTES in Spain. We are seeing new initiatives being launched. So I think it would be interesting to get your views on how regulation is helping the industry to move forward, and what else we should be there. And I think maybe, Jorge, if you can start by giving us your views on regulators and how you are helping the industry to move forward.
Thank you. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a rainy Huelva on this third day of the National Hydrogen Congress. As you know, rain is a blessing for this region, for this piece of land, since we are experimenting a very severe drought now for already 5 years in a part of Europe which is already water scarce by itself. No? So rain is a blessing. I think you will not see anyone complain about the rain today in Huelva, even though maybe you were expecting a different kind of weather before your visit. I think we all agree regulation is important, obviously, and we're all expecting, we're all waiting to see a kind of a streamlined framework from Brussels down to member states, down to regions. No? That's something that we are all looking forward to having. No? We were discussing 2 minutes before. What about the Green Hydrogen Bank, as an example? What about this auction? How will it work? Is it ambitious enough? What about permitting? Will it really be more simple to speed up permitting? What we can do as a regional government in this field is, first of all, show a lot of proactivity towards engaging with potential investors, a lot of time dedicated to investors, obviously to present the Andalusian pitch to them, our natural resources, geographic location, port infrastructure, experience and know-how in handling green molecules in our energy parks, all the refineries. But also the idea of having sustainable energy costs. That is one thing which is not really related to regulation, but we spend a lot of time on that. And then with regards to regulation, 2 things I'd like to mention. One is we have put together a practical guidelines as to how to proceed, how to put in motion a green hydrogen or a green molecules related project in Andalucía, which was actually announced here in Huelva 2 days ago. Right? That's important. The second thing is we are running the permitting process associated to these projects, most of them through our project acceleration unit. So these projects are considered to be strategic for the region. Therefore, they get a project manager assigned to them. It's a one port of call for all permits associated to that project, and that way we are reducing the permitting process by 50%, almost guaranteed. Even in some cases by 2/3. Even though we have an environmental legislation which is even more strict in some elements than the rest of Spain. So that's what we are doing in the field of regulation from a regional government point of view. But there's so much more that needs to be done if Europe to win this game.
Clear. No, well, I think that we need to start, you know, and definitely I think that you are mentioning quite a bit some of the points that have been mentioned several times over the last days, you know, as chat. Shows that we are pointing in the right direction, right?
Y creo que estamos apuntando en la dirección
I think that we have discussed the first one, or introduced the first one, that is regulation. I would like to go to the second one, that is technology. But I would like to understand, how do you see the technology? Are we ready for that? What do we need to make it happen, and how do we do it?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think we need to distinguish 2 aspects. The one is availability and scalability of the technology and the maturity of the same. And as we progress through the hydrogen economy to be established, I find it interesting how every half a year we tend to change a bit our opinion where actually the problem lies. If you had asked me a year ago, we would talk about scarcity of raw materials. We had a time a year ago where we were very worried about the supply chain of some of the auxiliaries, transformers, for example, compressors. The bottleneck was the transformer supply. We have got that pretty much under control, meanwhile. But now the focus shifts to something else. And I believe for today, and maybe the next couple of months, I believe the biggest issue is, for example, grid connections. On the availability of the extra capacity for the electrolyzers, and then also on the regulatory environment, because we will get a lot of more requirements coming from the European level to the national grid operators to the projects that will change requirements. So we have a ever-changing set of requirements on the projects that are in transition towards FID. That's the environment in which we are in. Now, capacity. We have just in November inaugurated our factory in Berlin. And again, we thought building up enough capacity for the electrolyzers is the bigger problem. I got a lot of questions. Can I reserve capacity? What if I need 500 megawatt in 26? Can I give you a down payment, a capacity charge, whatever? We realized this is not so much of a problem. We have now established a line that can produce a gigawatt of stacks a year. This can be easily expanded to 3, almost 4 gigawatt, basically by adding manpower, not so much by procuring more machines. And once you have established a more industrialized production process, once I know how my algorithm in the robot works, the time I need to expand capacity further is the lead time of the robot. That's it. So I can confidently say that production capacity on the electrolyzer stacks is mitigated very much. The challenge I see is on the earlier steps in the supply chain. And then I want to close the loop to the ever-changing set of changing requirements. We have to see that we have a whole set of tier 1, 2, 3 suppliers in our backend. And as further I go upstream in my supply chain, the companies become smaller. And for those companies, it is quite a problem if all of a sudden I delay the orders by a year. A large corporation can take it. My bosses don't like it, but they can take it. But if you're a small, medium company, where we came a year ago or 2 years ago and said, can you expand your capacity according to my capacity that I have now in Berlin? And by the way, I do something between 1 and 4 gigawatt, just get prepared, please. So I asked them to put money on the table, buy assets, and get people involved. And now they financially struggle if we delay projects because we, for example, change requirements on the grid, or we don't know anything about the offtake, or we're waiting for final funding approvals, or we reapply for a different funding instrument. So my biggest worry today is how do we manage the supply chain, and how do we keep the necessary players in the upstream supply chain engaged and alive in a time where I see the market in Europe still slipping by 2 to 3 quarters compared to what I've expected before, and in the US, probably even up to 2 years.
Okay, well, I think that is good news. Well, we are here, at least in terms of capacity, and I think that some concerns that can be tackled, definitely. Yeah. Okay, great. Let me go to the third one. So we discussed partnerships, collaboration. I think that ports definitely can be a key connection. Usually and historically, ports have helped to connect people in different places on the world, enable trade, etc. So I would like to hear from an international port, European international port in Spain. Which is your view of this collaboration? Which is the role that ports have to play in this transition? And how can you enable this scale up, by establishing these connections? So maybe Monica to start.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I have to say thank you to my colleague for inviting us here as a colleague, and congratulate everyone on this really good conference. I've seen such a lot of energy and such a lot of connections being made. It's lovely to see it. Back to your question, how does it work? We all need each other. And the good thing about ports that are a little bit further away and not next door, they're always your best colleagues and friends because we want to work together and ship the cargo from the one place to the other. And so that's a very good thing. We have a lot of friends in the world, we think, in our industry. For us, to get this started was very important. I feel very fortunate to have had colleagues already in 2013 who said, you know, we need to do something with hydrogen. It's going to be part of the energy mix. You have to imagine some 40 to 50% of our turnover as a port is related to energy. We have a lot of energy coming in. About 13% of what is used in Europe comes into Europe via Rotterdam. So to not be prepared for that, you know, that would be a huge risk. But you also have to have the good fortune of someone who starts that discussion early enough. For us, we look at ourselves as a port development company, not just a port. Port is a technical thing, you could say, but we have to think about the thousands of companies operating in our port, all the terminals receiving their stuff, and how to be sure that we have prepared sort of the underground for them to be able to change. And I fully agree, there's a lot of changes going on. At the same time, the whole supply chain is affected. We, as a port, are normally not in the beginning. But in this case, we are, because we have to transition an entire energy system, and it means so much to all the companies in our ports that we have to move before anyone else even thinks about moving. So that's been really challenging, but also a very interesting process for us. I think I've taken too much time because we're both supposed to say something, right?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ignacio.
Okay, thank you very much, Urbano. I think that, like Monica has said, the transition is not a transition of one sector. The transition is an ecosystem transition. The ecological energetic transition involves all the society, all the value chain of the energy, from the innovation, the technology, the manufacturer of the equipment, the electrolyzer, etc. Obviously, the production of the fuel itself, the logistic, and the off-takers. And the ports are in a key position in this chain. Industrial ports, Rotterdam is a global port, but also industrial port. Huelva is mainly an industrial port. We have two roles in this chain. The first one is giving support to the industry. Mainly, in the case of Huelva, giving support to the energetic industry. The 80% of the traffic of the port of Huelva are liquid bulk, mainly related with the energy, obviously with the fossil energy, fossil fuels. Although we are the second port in Europe, after Rotterdam, in traffic of biofuels.
Yeah.
Second of Europe. So the commitment of the port of Huelva with the energetic transition is full. We are lucky because the main players of the energetic transition are the current player of the fossil fuels. We have here these days about the project of CEPSA, the project of Enagas, the project of Iberdrola. All of them now is in the sector of the fossil fuels, and they will be the players of the transition. And this port, the Port of Huelva, as a key player in the logistic of the fossil fuels, will be a key player of the new fuels. This is the first role of the port, giving support to the industry and connecting or giving support to the connections between the production and obviously the off-takers. In the industrial ports, we have an important number of companies that are currently off-takers of hydrogen. We have talked about that yesterday on Wednesday. So I think that also the ports are the first site or the first option to locate the new production of the new fuels. And the other part is the role of the port helping or being an actor to decarbonize the maritime transport. The maritime transport is one of the sectors that more emissions has. and is one a sector that cannot be directly electrified. So this is the other part of our role in this process. So to resume, logistics is very, very important in any sector, but in the energetic sector, not in the energetic sector, because perhaps not in electricity, but in the new fuel sector is a key element, because if we have not an efficient logistic, the logistic may be the difference between having a competitive or not competitive new fuel, because the cost of the logistic of the hydrogen or the derivative of the hydrogen may be too high that in other markets may be not competitive. We are talking about cents of euros to have a competitive or not competitive. So very, very important from my point of view, the efficiency of the logistic process and the role of the ports giving that support to the logistic chains of the new fuels. Well, I think later we talk about how we are prepared now currently for that.
Perfect. No, I think that it's really important. Okay, Anna, I want to ask you something. You are the ones that are developing the projects. So considering that you have heard regulation, we have heard technology, ports, considering that EDP is looking at things around the world, what is missing to establish this international trade and to put all these things to happen? So what do we need? Do we need certification schemes we are missing? What is it? Is the demand? How do you see this playing on both sides of the Atlantic? You know, how are things going to happen?
Very good. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, especially to Siemens Energy. It's a real pleasure to be here and sharing some thoughts with you on the hydrogen. So if you ask me what's missing, actually we could be spending the entire morning here talking about what's missing, because really there are so many challenges when it comes to developing renewable hydrogen projects. We talked about infrastructure, we talked about technology, regulation. We really need a lot of these pieces of the puzzle to come together and to actually be able to develop real projects and real business case. The reality within renewable hydrogen is that we all recognize that it's needed for the decarbonization purpose. That's why we're here. But today, renewable hydrogen has no expression whatsoever on the energy mix. And this is simply because it's not competitive. It's really far from being competitive with the alternatives. So we really need to recognize there's a market failure. There's a market, more than a technology failure, there's a market failure. And so everything needs to start with policy. So we need to have policy objectives, and we do have very ambitious policy objectives. But then the policy tools need to come along, and the regulation and the policy instruments, including the funding tools, to make sure that the policy objectives are reachable. So if you ask me about the challenges of the international trade, I mean, apart from technology, there's still a lot of uncertainty on exactly how we're going to do that. The energy vectors that will win the race, maybe there will not be a winner, but several energy vectors or derivatives that will actually carry the renewable molecule. And apart from that, I mean, there's a lot of challenge when it comes to harmonizing standards and language. I mean, when you talk about renewable hydrogen, your interpretation may not be my interpretation about the renewable hydrogen. But then, if you want to trade it, we need to align on that definition. So we need to have a common understanding of what's renewable hydrogen in the US, in South America, in Europe, so that we can trade the same product. We're far from having the definition of the product. Even in Europe, where we have a delegated act already in place, we're far from having that definition established and an exact product to be able to trade. So actually, at EDP, we started developing some projects with the angle of exporting and international trade that happened in Brazil, for example, in Portugal as well. But soon we realized that there's so much that we need to learn, and there's so much room to learn from local development that international trade will certainly come, but in a longer term. So we're fully focused now on developing hydrogen projects where we have consumption next door. or we have potential for consumption. And decentralized doesn't necessarily mean small scale. It doesn't mean small scale. We have many potential to develop locally and learn. We have so much to learn from technology, from regulation, from putting the project really on the ground before. And by doing that, we avoid all the logistics that is not in place, transport, distribution, storage. So we're developing hydrogen projects with the luck to have, some sites that we are repurposing, coal power plants that we are closing. So we're phasing out of all of our activities associated with the coal power plants, and we're taking advantage of those sites, the existing infrastructures. So it's not a greenfield project; it's a brownfield that gives us, a head start. A lot of savings also on costs, but especially on calendar. And these are serious projects because, we've been with those communities for decades. So we have hundreds of people there employed. So people take us for serious because the projects really make sense. So we're repurposing some of our coal sites into renewable hydrogen hubs, not only because we have the land, the grid connection, the infrastructures, but the neighbors are all the good candidates for off-taking hydrogen, the refineries, the petrochemicals, the steel makers. And plus, all of these sites, or the majority of them, are on ports because the coal power plants used to work with imported coal. So they are on ports, so really, in a good position to later on, if the market is there, if the conditions are there, we are ready to scale up and export if that's going to be the reality in the future.
I think it's a pretty interesting view, and I was sure that
The best transport is the transport that you can avoid, that you have not to do.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
if you are in the port, and if the off-takers are in the port, you don't need to make transport. This is the most efficient transport. So you fully agree with Anna.
And if I may, I agree too. It may sound a bit strange because we're known for looking at the world also from a perspective of where would there be a surplus of volumes. But we actually also, there's a lot of projects announced worldwide. But there's also a lot of projects that might not really happen because they're waiting for offtake, especially the ones that are really geared to export because the market is not there yet. It's developing. It's a market failure situation. We have to create it ourselves. So it's not essentially failure, but it's something that's not there yet. And one of the things we look at for good projects where we think we need to connect with them is, do they have a first local off-taker to be sure they actually happen? So it's a mix of things. And we're also really looking at the really large upscale projects that are actually also really aiming for export because we need those very much and sooner than we might get them even. We need them now almost. But it's very important to look at both. I agree. And I don't believe in production for export only because it won't help the country itself. It doesn't work. It is a weird way of thinking. You can't just take. You have to, it has to be robust. So, yeah, fully agree.
Manuel, Jorge.
Just want to add on that because I think this is a very important aspect. We need to develop the local offtake in the countries where hydrogen is produced, no matter where on the planet and no matter how small the economy of that place is. Because you need people who are trained to safely operate these plants. So you cannot go from no infrastructure at all. And by the way, let me give you an example. No regulation, for example, on how to install such an electrolyzer and how to operate an electrolyzer plant. This is an animal that didn't exist in the industry landscape before. And so people, it's somewhere between a power plant and a chemical plant. And then you are the local regulator and we come up with a building permit. And then you sit there, you have two possible regulations, right? You have the regulation from a power plant and you have the one from a refinery. And the worst case that can happen is they just combine them both and send all requirements to us, which then we translate into cost. And then we make the thing very expensive. So and this is the natural thing that's going to happen. So we can't avoid this to happen, but we need to make it happen in a controlled way on smaller projects in many places so that the local communities get used, that the regulators do this kind of work to sweat the fear out of the system of not knowing exactly what this thing is, how I integrate it in my energy system, how I integrate it in my industry landscape, how I get the people trained. And what we have forgotten in the previous years where the hydrogen topic was very much hyped is we believe we can jump from nothing to a gigawatt plant. And I don't think that's going to happen. We need to build the medium-sized plants in many locations. For example, also here in this region, and I really appreciate what's going on in Huelva because it will build that stepping stones that gives the local communities the time to build up the competences, and it gives the industry the chance to create the stepping stones to learn and take risk out of the system. Because currently we calculate a lot of risk into the plants and into our offers. I wanted to connect what Anna said about the competitiveness. People always say we have to improve technology. Yeah, obviously we will. We will create scale effects. Yes. We will reduce the iridium loading in the PEM electrolyzer. Yes, we will do all this. We improve our manufacturing process and do it cheaper. And yes, we will also do this. But all this can be easily compensated by an increase of material cost, for example. And in the last years, this was the case. We have created a lot of productivity, but we have also seen inflation on almost all cost items on the bill of materials. But what we can reduce very soon by having operational experience is all those risk adders we have in for every single component in every step of the supply chain. So I think the majority of cost reduction we're going to see in the future is reduction of risk and not so much reduction of material prices.
Yeah, I guess this is the kind of interaction we all wanted, no? No script. No script.
Don't have time for questions.
Anna, you launched the panel.
You brought the table. Yeah. I think I understand. I perfectly understand Anna's point. No, I think so. We think utility companies, technologists are investing ahead of the curve. So I mean, the competitiveness is not there yet. It is not guaranteed. Now, if we think about it, having said that, in 2020, the central government in Spain, the Ministry for Ecological Transition, made a call for interest around green hydrogen, and there were only 28 proposals. They did the same thing a few months ago, and there were 650 proposals. So there's a lot of interest. And we think the interest has many reasons, but one of them is, when you think about it, 85% of the production costs of hydrogen is energy, is the renewable energy that you feed into the electrolysis process. 77% of the cost of methanol is the energy again. So what we appreciate is that the most solid and promising projects in Spain, and certainly in Andalucía, are the ones that already have that already need green hydrogen for internal purposes. So 40% of the hydrogen consumption in Spain is located in Andalucía. And that's where the experience in handling green molecules and so on comes from. So they already need a significant part of the production for internal purposes. And then they are striking very interesting deals, collaboration. So collaboration amongst the companies, which traditionally were competitors, or between companies in different sectors to establish already an acceptable level of offtake. That's what we appreciate in the big initiatives like CEPSA, but also Iberdrola, and so on. But that's also, coming to your point, what we see in a small project. For example, there's a little hydrogen plant close to Algeciras, in the area of San José del Valle, which is already up and running. It's already a 7 megawatt installation, and it already has its customers. So the off-taking is guaranteed. And that's going to be a learning curve. So we need to watch out around the competitiveness. We don't need to be, we shouldn't be confused by hype, but we see there is real interest, maybe because Spain has, Andalucía has, let's put it this way, 50% more solar radiation than Northern and Central Europe, and 13% more radiation than Spain's average. So that can give you some kind of advantage when it comes to energy costs. No? So we see real demand. We should not get crazy. We know there's a lot to do. Most of the projects still have a long way to go before coming into real industrial scale. But we're hopeful. All this interest will be channeled into fruition, particularly if we solve some regulatory issues and if we continue to foster collaboration between not only companies but also between regions and ports.
Okay.
As Ignacio and Monica said. Sorry.
Yeah. So, if I may, I will ask a question. and I think that many of the people in the audience might be thinking that, and it's okay. I can be a first mover. I'm hearing start local, look for your off-taker, etc., etc. But I think that we are also all seeing IRA, US. We are seeing other support mechanisms, Canada, etc., etc. I might say, why should I move the first? And I can be competitive today, but how do I ensure that I will be competitive in the future? So how do you see it? No, I think that what would you tell them?
You're preparing exactly what I wanted to respond to. So thank you for doing that. No, because while we are, I think, all agreeing about being practical, working together, taking the first possible step every time you can do it, and my having said that we also look for local offtake, it is also extremely important to keep dreaming and to keep having a vision in front of you and to think big, because if you only think small, you will remain small. And this is such a big challenge that you also have to look at potentially things that are risky, that feel uncomfortable, that are maybe not your most practical thing to do. And this is what first movers sometimes do. They take the risk. Actually, they take the bullet sometimes, because in a new market, new economy, you will have also big problems. Companies might fail. Not only the market, but companies take the risk of failing. And this is also where I think companies now also look at governments to give them that little bit extra of support, and maybe even more than a little bit, because it's so important and because it cannot be done on the basis of just the viable business case. So yes, you can do the first projects, but once you look at the volumes required, we also all have to think, okay, so those really big projects that people dare to announce and actually start taking FID on, we need them too. And you know, I'm sort of, you know, fingers crossed for some of them, but we need to support them every which way we can. It might take money, it might take time, it might take a lot of courage, and it might even take, you know, embarrassment because you supported something that failed. But in the end, you need to do it because you don't know, in this type of situation, we don't know beforehand what will be successful. So that's the scary thing here. So first movers, we have to be very grateful for, I think. That's my answer to your question, but maybe...
I fully agree. We have to give sign to some sector, specifically to the maritime transport sector, that we will be able to reach the goals, that we will produce enough new fuels at a competitive cost to convince the sector to begin the transition, because there are off-takers that don't need big investment because they currently are consuming grey hydrogen. But for example, the maritime sector has to invest like off-takers to make retrofitting of the engine or order new engines, new vessels with new fuels. They have to be convinced that if they take that decision, the sector has to transition together in the long term. They have to trust in this agenda, this planification. We need flagship projects. We don't need pilot projects. We have to be ambitious, I think that perhaps the objective has been defined from the climate policy. Perhaps this objective that has defined the European Union are more from the DG Climate, and they have not taken into account all the pragmatic needs of the industrial sector. Perhaps we have to combine, obviously, that, because as I said before, the speed of the transition will be the speed of the slowest part of the chain. It's like in logistics. In logistics, we say that the logistic chain has the strength of the weaker part of the chain. Here is the same. So we have to take into account the needs and the plans of all the sector. And the maritime sector, the sector that I knew better, needs a lot of new fuels, not just now, but they have to be convinced that they will have enough volume and enough logistic network for the distribution, because the maritime sector is a global sector. They need to have enough fuels and in enough ports to have bunkering services all over the world, because the maritime companies, shipping companies, are global. So I think that we have to be ambitious. We have to define an objective based in the climate policies, but we have to be pragmatic, and the road map has to be ambitious, but with the feet on the floor and giving good sensations to the market. The confidence, the trust on the objective is basic for the investors and for the off-takers.
Okay. I would like to, because we have discussed international trading, we have discussed local projects, we have discussed the relevance of the policy. Jorge, I think that something I would like to ask you is, how relevant do you see the industrial policy to ensure that there is energy independence in Europe, but also the development of the technology in Europe, Spain, locally? You know, I think that, of course, we all want this to be global and a global market, but I think that we also have learned some hard lessons lately about these dependencies, right? So,
if we think basically, so from the Andalusian governments, no? So when we look at the whole region, what we see is we have the opportunity to play a prominent role, because Europe wants to reindustrialize itself through clean technologies and digitalization. Europe wants to reduce its energy dependence. Europe wants to be more autonomous, no, in some strategic areas. No? So in all those elements, we think Andalusia can play a prominent role. No? So we already, if we talk about renewable energy, for example, we already have 11 installed gigawatts, and we have another 22 underway in the permitting process. That is quite significant. So we want to make that a lever to do different things. One is we are obsessed with achieving the maximum value added in that deployment process. So we not only want to have the installed capacity, that's okay. We want to have value added. So the engineering of those plants should be done in Andalusia. Most of the key elements can be done in Andalusia. And we're talking about electricity controls, we're talking about trackers, we're talking about transformers. Maybe we're not talking about solar panels at this point in time, all right?
not yet.
So that's one thing. We want to have the maximum value chain in Andalusia. The other thing is we want clean energy at competitive costs to be a lever to transform our industry and to bring more industry to Andalusia. So we see energy as an industrial investment location factor. That's what we're aiming at. So we have an industrial policy which is underpinned by 19 value chain plans targeting different sectors. All of them have significant resources when it comes to supporting investments, industrial investment in Andalucía. And then if we talk about green hydrogen, as our president announced on Wednesday at the inauguration, we have already forwarded 70 million euros as incentives to drive industry around green hydrogen. So what we want to have is not only, we want to facilitate the projects, and the main issue, again, we go back to the offtake is there, so the commercial part, the competitiveness. But once that is done, in parallel, what we want to do is to stimulate investments in batteries, in storage tanks, in electrolyzers for sure. There's already one plant, an electrolyzer plant, working in operation in Sevilla, and there will be at least one more. So this is what we want to streamline. So we not only want the installed capacity, we want this to be a fundamental change agent to transform our industry and also to bring more industry from outside.
Okay, interesting. Manuel, I would like to get your views, similar topic. So at the end, we are talking about energy independency, but also independence, but we also at some point want to be technologically independent, in Europe, and to be able to have production here and to rely more or less, on some other elements, but not be fully reliant on technologies coming from other places. So how do you see that, from your point, being a global company, but clearly with an European focus and nature?
Yeah, that's one of the most fundamental questions. And you just mentioned solar, and something we discuss a lot. And we have seen what happened to solar. We are not yet there with wind, but on the way. We are on the way with electric vehicles. And then I always get the question, how can you avoid to do the same or to experience the same on the electrolyzers? Now, if we knew the answer, we would probably had different outcomes in the previous rounds. But I think that the I go really high level now, but the geopolitical environment today is a little bit different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So we might have a chance to get to a different outcome, but we also have to do things differently. And that is a question that not only the manufacturers can answer themselves, because there is an aspect of regulation. I don't think that we will ever see a protectionist behavior in Europe. That's not European. Yeah. So we need to find ways to do similar things in a way that it still somehow resonates with the European morale, because otherwise we're not Europeans. And that's a kind of a dilemma. Yeah? I see in the US, for example, they're very straightforward. Yeah, what they did with the IRA, clear rules. I had just a few weeks ago a nice discussion. I wanted to understand again how this anti-dumping laws on solar panels work in the US. And my next question was, why don't you do the same with electrolyzers? I said, yeah, because we haven't seen dumping yet. I said, yeah, okay, but once you see it, what's going to happen? And we do the same. So I think in the US, they have their mechanism, and it has already been proven or is currently proving that it will be more or less effective. So I think the European answer to this is still to be found. And we might need to open up a little bit the solution space here. I don't think that Europe will exclude foreign manufacturers' equipment for European funding schemes. Difficult. But what if we at least ask the question, when you apply for a project, where's your equipment coming from? And create a transparency and make that known to the decision makers, because at the end, we have also the politicians who say, I want to have these jobs in Europe. And they say, okay, fantastic, then let us please at least be transparent what projects receive funding and where the supplies are coming from. And then we make a conscious decision what's going to happen. And that's an in-between. I don't know if feasible, but I think we have to think along these lines to at least get this intercontinental topic somehow under control. And then there is a local and regional aspect, which I also find very interesting. I get the question, can we produce electrolyzers in my region, in my country? And everybody's asking the same thing. And then I'm saying, yes, we could, but then I have 20 factories all over the globe and I'm pretty underutilized and this stuff will get expensive and then you don't want to buy it anymore. So I also call for a bit of reason here, especially on the electrolyzers. We are currently not exploiting the capacity we have. So I'm not saying it's a no or a never, but we have to be correct on the timing. Yeah? So as we progress and once the volumes come, there will be good reasons to kind of decentralize the production. For the time being, I don't see it. From a supply chain perspective, from a cost perspective, and more importantly, even from a quality perspective. We are still tweaking so much on the technology. If I want to implement these tweaks in a network of 15 factories somewhere over the globe, it takes us years to push this through the system. Transformer factory, similar situation, yeah, which by the way also reduced the spread of the footprint massively in the last years, partly to our suffering today, and we are fixing it again by expanding this. But as long as technology isn't stable or innovation cycles are very fast, you will always tend to centralize the production of the critical parts because you can implement changes much faster. And I think this is a fundamental truth. And then we have to see what we can do inside these boundary conditions.
Okay, clear. And I would like to come back to something. We have discussed at the beginning regulation. We have discussed targets, how the enablers are being put in place. Basically, if you look at the regulation, regulators are asking developers of projects to be producing 4 million tons of green hydrogen in 6 years. Also, we are establishing some constraints, as you can see in Red 2. How do you see this? How do you see it? Do you see this something that we can achieve? Do you see that from a developer perspective projects, it's something that we are going to be able to get there? Are the barriers from, okay, I'm giving you the right incentives to be able to achieve and to scale up your plans and to achieve your ambitions, but not only your ambitions, the ambitions that globally we are defining, or we are deviating from there and we are going to struggle?
I don't think we're deviating. I think we keep on going on the same path. I don't think we're deviating, but clearly targets are very bold. Targets are extremely ambitious, and oftentimes I think maybe we're risking some credibility here by just doubling the targets for 2030. Even the initial targets were already ambitious, so not quite sure how we're going to deliver that in the short term. And we were also discussing that we tend to overestimate short term and maybe underestimate long term. So I think we're going on that direction. We're overestimating short term. The reality on the ground is that decisions are being delayed. If you asked me a couple of years ago, if you asked me last year where I would be today, I thought I would be much more advanced than I am. And this is mainly because there are uncertainties and I still have some missing information and risks that I do not manage. And I cannot make the final investment decisions without some clarity on these aspects. And most of them come from regulation or policy, in particular funding tools. I mean, from our perspective, we're making everything that we can to be ready to deliver. This means from the technical aspects, we have the projects very well advanced with detailed engineering in place, with grid connection, with environmental permitting, with all the infrastructures ready. So we're actually at that point in time in many projects and sizable projects. So why have we not made final investment decisions? Because it's mature. I mean, we've gone through the procurement process with OEMs, with EPCs, and we have secured funding. I mean, in Spain, for example, in Spain alone, we have 5 projects that have secured PERTE, funding from the national government. And we have 3 projects that have secured the label of important projects of common European interest from the European Commission. But until today, we have no visibility from the Spanish government on how much, when we'll finally get the support. And this IPCEI process, for example, they all started with a manifestation of interest back in 2019. So the project today is completely obsolete. So when actually the government will approach us and say, oh, here is the procedure that you have to put in place to actually receive the funding that the European Commission approved 2 years ago, I have to tell, this is no longer valid. I mean, the project has turned upside down. The numbers in the business case are completely not what we see today. Not capital costs, equipment costs, renewables, power supply, everything is much more expensive today than we thought 2 years ago. It's different, it's simply different. So this is taking so long, the process are taking so long that, I mean, we're ready to make final investment decisions, we're making those links. And the funding tools, it's not the case of the IPCEI, but the PERTE, most of the recovery and resilience funds in different national member states, by design, they don't close the funding gap. Because by design, they support a portion of the CapEx, which in itself is a small portion of the entire costs. So by construction, and this is assumed, I mean, this is not new for everybody. So by construction, if you get them, you're not closing the funding gap. So we are accepting the funding tools with the clear understanding that this is an option. It's not an investment decision. It's an option. It's another, another step forward, but still not enough. And then we have instruments like the H2 Bank that, at least in this first edition, will not allow for accumulation of funding. So we're completely puzzled with this, because actually the most mature projects, the ones that you have more advanced, with secured funding, with advanced permitting and all of that, they will not be able to apply for the H2 Bank. Or if you apply, then you have to forfeit other type of instruments. So, I mean, everybody's learning. Hydrogen projects are the first of a kind for everybody. For regulation, for policymakers, for technology developers, for renewable developers, for consumers. These are the first of a kind. So we all need to embrace the idea of innovation. More than scaling up, we need to talk about numbering up. If you talk about scaling something up, it means that you already have something. And oftentimes we don't have anything. So before scaling up, we need to number up. We need to try, we need to make mistakes, we need to learn. So I agree, I actually think that we really need to promote pilots. We have a pilot project in place in Brazil, it's operating since 2022. We have another pilot project under construction in Portugal. And these are investments that we're making to learn. These are not commercial projects. We're not selling the hydrogen. We're just learning, and we're learning a lot. It doesn't mean if it's 1 megawatt or 5 or 10, it's a tremendous learning experience for everybody. So we're learning, we're making mistakes, we're improving, and we're ready to do, the next step, the commercial, and to hopefully this year make important final investment decisions in some projects, especially here in Spain.
Okay, I think that you raise a point that is quite interesting, and I would like to ask your views in general. It's better to support 100 projects with 10 million or to support 10 projects with 100 million? Which are your views? Because I think that we are seeing, my question is more, it's better to distribute the support and the regulatory support across a broad range of projects, so then we take everyone one step closer. That is probably the approach we are seeing more in the European level, or to take an approach much closer to what we are seeing in places like Australia, where they say, look, it's just 3 projects, but I'm sure that they are gonna be on the ground in a few years, so we can all learn. So I don't know, which are your views on this?
You're answering the question by posing it, aren't you?
I'm asking the question, then I let you decide.
No, maybe I can.
Please.
Yeah. Oh, well, we'll share the reply. Huh?
No, it's hard to.
The sound is a bit hard. Yeah.
It's I think I was wondering if we would have had representatives from. I'm sure in other panel discussions, maybe panelists from companies like Cepsa or maybe Iberdrola would have shown maybe a different, a more optimistic picture because of the reasons I explained before. No? But I totally understand Anna's point. I think so. If Europe is trying to compete with the US, for example, with the IRA and its direct subsidies established by, in terms of dollars per kilograms of hydrogen, how can it take 4 years to define these IPCIs projects? I mean, it's just too long. It's the same thing with regards to everything related to the Plan for Recovery, Transformation and Resilience, the PERTES that she mentioned. So Spain is an almost federal country. It's a semi-federal country. But regional governments have had no visibility whatsoever in these plans. It's a pity because it's the biggest opportunity that we probably have after COVID, this massive amount of money through which Europe wanted to double down and say, no, I want to strengthen my economy, but I don't want to neglect my commitment to climate change, to decarbonization, and moreover after the war in Ukraine. No? But how can it take 4 years to have any clarity on these issues? And as Anna said, maybe once you get the clarity, your project is already updated, out of date. So that makes absolutely no sense. No? This is what we will. I always have this conversation with the central government. We should speed up. We should have visibility as to the projects which are underway, because otherwise there will be no way we can see them come to fruition. Anyway, this is what I wanted to point out. I think Europe needs to really change tack and change the speed at which it does things.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Monica,
Yeah.
you wanted to say something else?
I'm totally going along with Anna again, having witnessed and been part of 2 IPCEI projects. I mean, a few months into the process, it was clear to me that this was going to delay projects rather than speed them up, because it was too complicated, too many forms, too big, and too much political discussion around them inside the European Union. I mean, that's also a fact of life. Different countries, different interests. So a lot of discussion on how to allocate funding, which is unfortunate, but this is how it is, I think. Not to go into, but it's logical. There is different interests, and the whole challenge here is to simplify that kind of. But I really liked what you said, Minister, in the beginning about reducing the time for applications with 50%. That's exactly what we need. We don't want to be in discussion on how to get money. We want to be in discussion is why we need it, and have as much support for that. Something else that wasn't mentioned in discussion, I find very interesting as well, is the actual cost of capital in these type of uncertain processes. If you look at all these bits of the supply chain, in Rotterdam, we're doing a lot of work now on actually, with a group of companies and governments and banks, looking at, in some cases, in some countries, because this is bigger than the Netherlands, it's bigger than Europe. It really is something we need to do as, the world has to do it. So you have to be open to not compete, but look at how could you, not get it into each other's way, but because we need everything. It's not small. There is no competition, because the market has plenty of space for everything. But in some countries, the cost of capital is a lot higher than in most European countries. And in those countries, they could have a gigantic renewable resources, which we will need as a world in the end. It's a bit taking it away from our central discussion here, but if we can also reduce the cost of capital by working together on how can we de-risk each little bit of the supply chain with a little bit support exactly where the weakest link is, and then the whole cost of it goes down. And this also makes it possible for companies like Anna to not even wait for the subsidies, but just venture, because you can actually finance your projects at a much lower risk and cost. I'm simplifying, I know, but there's very practical things we can do apart from the forms and the waiting and the discussions. But it's a matter of putting everything on the table and really having a good look with all the different parties involved and all their different interests, and understanding where their pain is, and then trying to move to eliminate that pain. If it's governmental support, it's governmental support. If it is a logistic chain element, it's a logistic chain element. Is it unavailability of ships, for instance? All these things, but you need to know them. And I think you mentioned parts of the puzzle, Anna, parts of the puzzle, because it's so complex and everything's moving. Without complicating things, we also have to make sure that we see everything. The last thing I really want to say as well is the electrolyzer focus. It is important, but there's also other ways to make hydrogen. I get a lot of connections suddenly saying, hey, we're doing hydrogen and CO2 and making methanol from manure, sludge, wastewater. If we combine all these elements, we have much more power, also at lower cost, actually. But
Manuel, sorry.
Just want to quickly add something on your question, many small or few big projects. I think the ultimate goal is to enable and preserve the European industry landscape, specifically refining, chemical, steel. There is a lot to do on transport, but I think that's going to happen. But where I'm worried is about the jobs in refining chemicals and steel. So, and that requires very, very large installations. The typical refinery will end up installing something between 800 to 1500 megawatt of electrolyzers, a DRI steel plant, 2 to 3 gigawatt, big numbers, we all know that. So my answer would be rather a few large projects, because we have to now push our learning, what you talked about, into large-scale industrial applications. Otherwise, we get stuck in the 5 to 10, 15 megawatt projects, which is valid, but I think it's more or less done. Yeah, we learn already in this space. What we did not yet trigger is the learnings in this 100 to 200 megawatt projects, and a lot of them that are now in the IPCEI process are in this range. I think we're having a front of 100, 200, sometimes 350 megawatt installations in front of us. But we are also talking about easily 200, 300, 400 million investment, and which then the large industrial players have to sanction. And then, of course, all the corporate processes come into play. I mean, this is nothing that you do overnight and say, let me try out whether that works. You try something out. If you're really ambitious, you try something out for 5 million, but not for 500. So we should really strive to create an environment in which the large industrial players are able to sanction these kind of investments, and they are taking a significant risk. We have to be fair here. Yeah? We are talking large, publicly listed corporations. They are liable to their boards, to their shareholders, to the pension funds. They all want their double-digit margins. We have to let them live and not come with completely exaggerated expectations. On the other hand, I believe if now every side gives and takes a little bit, and we get into this next step, that is super important for the European industry landscape, because it will also help to ramp up the supply chains here. So I would go for 10 large with the right companies.
Thank you for the answer. I thought we were getting without it.
A short comment about the size of the project. We have talked about pilot projects, big commercial projects. I think we have to distinguish two parts. I fully agree that for the improving the efficiency of the technology to make a more mature technology, we have to explore in pilot projects. Perhaps the pilot projects, small pilot project, even commercial pilot project may be suitable for off-takers that have not to invest to consume the hydrogen, but we have to take into account that there are some sectors, one of them, the maritime sector, that has a big potential to be a consumer. We are talking about near 100 million tons of hydrogen per year to change all the energy sources for the maritime sector. That means 800 or near 800 million tons, for example, of methanol. This sector has to invest to become an off-taker. It's completely different. So this sector that has to invest to be an off-taker of the hydrogen needs a more clear signal that this is viable, not technically viable, commercially viable in cost and mainly in distribution. So I think that we have to support just now the flagship projects, the commercial flagship project. In Huelva, we have all the projects that we have talked about yesterday. At the same time, obviously, the pilot projects in order to improve the efficiency of the production process. But there are two different points of view, and both have to be supported.
Okay. I think that I see that we are running out of time, as always. But before that, there is a topic we touched base a bit at the beginning, and we have not come back to that. So I would like to learn more from the ports side. What are you doing to prepare to that, right? Because you mentioned that, okay, there is these two roles that you can have. First, potentially moving the molecule, and second, potentially enabling the decarbonization of the maritime industry. So how are you preparing to that, and which are the steps that Port of Rotterdam and Port of Huelva are already taking?
Well, we're probably doing a lot of the same things.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
Well, now, as we say in Spain, I will talk about my book. That means about my port. Okay. Well, as I said before, I think yesterday we have a roundtable with our president and the president of the Port Authority of Algeciras. Port of Huelva is an energetic port, 80% of our traffic. Important relevant industrial companies producing traditional fuels, fossil fuels, are located inside the port or near the port. And the energetic transition for us is an objective because we are combined, but because the business of the port is based in this sector. So we have recently approved our new strategic plan from here to 2030. Our first strategic line objective is to have a leadership position in the development of the new fuels, based in hydrogen, renewable gas, bio fuels of second generation, etc. Here we are planning a roadmap, investing to provide basic infrastructure and land, equip the land to these new projects, collaborating with our concessionaire and our clients, improving the facilities of the port to become a hub, not only to produce and export the fuels, but also to supply bunkering, not only in Huelva, but also, for example, in Gibraltar Strait, Algeciras Bay, Tangier, and all the ports surrounding Huelva. Yesterday we talked about that in the collaboration into the ports of Algeciras and Huelva, and being really a partner of the industry that is located here to develop this project. We will invest from here to 2030 about 400 million euros, not in the industry because this is a private investment, but in supply or providing the infrastructural installation to make easy the industrial development. And one important thing I want to remark: the new fuels, from the logistic point of view, are more chemical products than energetic products. The logistic of the methanol, the hydrogen, the ammonia is a chemical logistic. It's not a fossil fuel logistic. The Port of Huelva has a leadership position in Spain in fossil fuels and in chemical traffic. So now, just now, we are prepared to give support to any type of traffic of the new fuels. We don't need any adaptation. We will work to improve the maritime capacity, the number of terminals, because probably during the next 10, 15 years, we will add to the current traffics, current fossil fuel traffic, the new traffics. Perhaps in the very long term, we will have a substitution process, and we will decrease the traffic of fossil fuels, and will substitute by the new fuels. But the message is clear. The Port of Huelva, and probably, obviously, Port of Rotterdam, all the ports that now have traffic of chemical product are ready. Just now, tomorrow, we can give a logistic service to any of the traffic of the new fuels. Right. And I think this is important, because this is an issue that the companies, the industry that is going to produce this type of fuels cannot be solved in all the ports.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to confirm that's absolutely true. I actually also liked what you said about being a partner to the business community, because that's very important. But we are ready to do refueling, and we've been getting, phone calls, emails from shipping lines, companies that want to know, when can we do our new bunkering in Rotterdam? And what they're asking for is ammonia, methanol, and liquid hydrogen. That's the three things they're looking at, but they have to make a decision. They want to know, if I buy a ship and that ship's going to last 25 years, of course, they're also looking at, dual systems, but they have big decisions to make, and they're making them now. And they want our reassurance that they can actually safely and efficiently, because that's also important, time is money, certainly for big ships, do this. So we have a big harbor master department in Rotterdam, and they've been already, involved in pilots with those three types of fuels, together with certain companies, to see how, where, when, how fast. It's all already happening. So although we're all saying it's difficult and challenging, actually we are proceeding towards the situation where it's actually, available. So this is also a message to anyone hesitant in production. Go.
I fully agree, and the availability of the new fuels will be, in the short term, a competitiveness factor for the ports. Yesterday, Javier Goñi from Fertiberia said that one of the incentives to produce green fertilizant were the requirement of their clients. Now, in the maritime sector, the cargo owners are asking to the shipping companies to transport their goods, their products, with net zero emissions, because the carbon footprint of the transport is added to the carbon footprint of the goods that they transport. And now important companies are doing tenders in which the requirement is that the transport has to be made with a net zero emission. In the maritime transport, this may be more incentivizing factor than even the regulation, I think.
Okay. Well, we only have 5 more minutes, so I would like to ask a final question to all of you, and I would like to get one by one your views on, okay, after all we have discussed now here, where do you think that we need to put the focus across policy, partnerships, and collaboration for the next 3, I would say, 2 years in order to make this a reality? So please, one by one, maybe.
I think the transition, as I said before, is the transition of the whole ecosystem. So the speed has to be coordinated. So in this type of process, we have to put the focus in the bottlenecks. We have to define a roadmap from the regulation point of view, technological point of view, the pragmatic point of view, we have to detect, like in any project, where are the bottlenecks, and we have to put the conditions to avoid the bottlenecks. From my point of view, in the short term, the bottlenecks is the final investment decision of important projects that has to be decided in the next month. And to decide, yes, in Huelva we have some projects that the final investment decision will be made at the end of 2024 or beginning of 2025. And to take that decision, there are regulatory and perhaps funding conditions that have to be clear. And as Anna said before, I think that the objectives, the path is the correct, the objectives is the correct, but the speed and the methodology has to be clear, more clear perhaps, no? But I think that the current bottleneck is the final investment decision of some important project, flagship project that needs to trust in the roadmap and the instrument. And the regulation, maybe the regulation that the politicians said, but has to be the same for the future.
Monica?
Well,
Closing.
I think the word trust is a word in the maritime industry that is probably one of the characteristics of the maritime industry, because in the old days you used to send a ship somewhere and you didn't know if it was going to reach the other end of the ocean. Trust is very important. You put money into something and then you have to see it disappear beyond the horizon and then hope it arrives safely. And the maritime industry is known for trust. Ports always shake hands. But I think that kind of mentality is needed everywhere now. And that's the challenging thing. We have to trust that if we start producing, there will be an off-taker in the end, even though they're not signing anything now. And that's difficult, but that's the only way to do it. You have to believe in what you're doing and just do it. It sounds very American and very simplified, but in the end, it's the only way, because this is something we need to create from the ground, from scratch, from belief. And if I look back 4 years, because we keep saying it's so hard and difficult, but if we look back 4 years, so much has been done already. It's incredible. So we just keep going like this. We will get the achieved targets.
Anna?
Well, it's after this entire conversation, it's difficult to sum it up, but I agree with what you just said, that final investment decision is what's preventing us from moving ahead, right? But then we need to go deep and understand what's preventing the final investment decision, and it's really a panoply of aspects. But if I had to summarize this in just one aspect, I would say the risk allocation. We need to understand, and the risks associated with this investment decision are enormous, from funding aspects, from regulation, from technology, from off-takers, and this, game of keep pushing risks. I don't want to take this risk. I don't want to take this risk. So we all need to understand that we all need to assume a certain share of the risks in the proportion that is, fair, and allocate the risks to the ones that are better positioned to manage them. Otherwise, it would be very imbalanced, and nobody will take the next step.
Manuel?
From my perspective, it's about focus, and I acknowledge that from the perspective of a public sector funding entity, it's always better to try to make many people somehow happy and get everybody engaged, because then you don't need to choose. I think we need to do the opposite. We have to decide to make 2 happy and 3 sad, because the higher motive from my side is we need to get assets on the ground and running. There is still so much to do, specifically, and we haven't addressed it today, on safety, for example, on large plants. We will only figure it out if we build some. And the last thing we want to see is a serious safety incident in a large plant, because that will impact the whole industry, everybody, no matter what, no matter who built it. Yeah. And so we need to make sure that we mobilize the resources to get this gradually under control before something serious happens. And that, because that will cost us another 2 years. So, and therefore we have to start in plants in an industrial environment with industrial customers, with industrial spec, so that we test it on the real case where we want to go.
Jorge.
So I first would like to thank Siemens Energy for organizing this panel and to give a big hand to my fellow panelists, because me and my team, we learned so much through this session, as I'm sure all the audience did. No? I wanted to say just a few things quickly. One is Andalucía has an optimistic outlook on green hydrogen. So we presented our roadmap yesterday here in this conference. We have 23 projects, which we consider to be really promising. They represent 3.7 gigawatts, which is about 1/3 of Spain's goals. It's looking good for the reasons I explained and what we see the level of maturity of some of the projects. But having said that, if Europe does not want to miss this train, we need to change some things. Primarily, things related to providing certainty to businesses with regards to their return on investments, business case, viability, feasibility. This area is really important. And I think we should also double down to make sure that we keep value chains in Europe. We don't see what happened with solar panels happen again with electrolyzers and the likes. This should be a priority area. And I'll finish by mentioning a couple of things we didn't elaborate really too much on. One is training people. It is estimated through a study that Manpower presented at Davos that 1.7 million jobs will be created in Europe around green molecules. 1.7 million jobs. We've seen the projections, and we say very clearly in Andalucía that there will be a widening mismatch between demand and offer. So we need to really make sure we train people, enough people in time. We're making dedicated piece of work, very solid piece of work with two other regional ministries in order to reduce that probability, the likelihood of having this big mismatch. One more thing, transport, electricity transport infrastructure. I would like to think that it's going to happen, but we shouldn't underestimate that. It said that for every million invested in renewable energy, you should invest between 0.50 cents and €1 in infrastructure. We are not equipped. Nobody else is in other parts of the world, but that's something we shouldn't underestimate. And safety, we will, just a quick nugget, we will run a safety seminar around green hydrogen on May 21st in Sevilla, because we're also really conscious that this is something that we need to build and be really doubling down on. And I'll finish by saying that if you think about all these challenges, collaboration is key to solve all of them. Cooperation between administrations, between governments, collaboration between companies, collaboration between companies that used to be competitors. The size of the challenges is so big, and collaboration with key infrastructure like ports. No? Many thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy that finance has not been raised as an issue. So it means that the panel the other day worked really well. So banks, we are here, it's clear. Well, no, jokes apart, thank you very much to all the panelists. I think it has been great. And thank you all for being here with us today.
Thank you.